the recordings all.
This all makes it written.
Yeah, because I had called Lau, but she said she had other plans, so she couldn't come.
Okay, start whenever you're ready.
Okay, good evening. Welcome to our first class in a new series on the Tanya. A little bit of an introduction is in order. The Tanya is divided into different parts, 5 parts, and the primary part is the largest section is the first, which has 53 chapters. And we're going to be studying and starting with chapter number 26, which is really a subsection within the first part of the Tanya. It starts on a new subject on one hand. On the other hand, it's a continuation of what we learned before. The Tanya, the author, the Alter Rebbe says, is about fulfilling the Torah's statement that it's very near, very close to you to serve God with your mouth, with your actions, and with your heart. That every person has the ability, it's highly accessible to every individual to serve God with the totality of your being. The question is, how does one accomplish that? So the Tanya starts off to establish what is a human being? Who are we? What is the anatomy of our soul? And the Alter Rebbe explains that we have 2 souls. The Talmud always speaks about the good inclination, the evil inclination, but it's not just inclinations, because one entity can have different inclinations. It's 2 separate entities. We have a godly soul, but before our godly soul manifests itself in us, we have an animal soul or a vital soul. And these 2 souls are in constant conflict. They're competing for mastery over the person. And the Alter Rebbe explains how it is that we gain mastery over the animal soul. And he describes different personality types. The ultimate personality type, which is elusive for most, is the tzaddik, who not only is capable of mastering behavior, but is also capable of mastering their very personality. They can transform their personality so that their animal soul no longer desires and craves anything negative. The animal soul is completely within the under the influence and governed totally by the godly soul. But then what is it that we could see ourselves aspiring to? If we can't aspire to reach that level, we could aspire to become a Beinoni, the intermediate person, who does not gain mastery over the personality. It doesn't change a person's desires. You could be a Beinoni and you could still crave the same things that the Rasha, the lower level individual, craves. You could still have the ability to commit any sin if it's based on your personality, but you're able to control it. How? By using your mind, because the godly soul, when you engage the intellect of the godly soul and you meditate on God, it will ultimately lead to the emotions of the godly soul becoming the dominant emotions, and you will be able to control yourself. Because if you're in love with God, you're not going to do something to slap him in the face. If you have the sense of awe of God, you're not going to do something that is contrary to his will. So it sounds pretty easy. All you have to do is meditate, and then you have no more negative desires. It's a little more difficult than that, and the Alter Rebbe explained that there are 2 types of meditation. One meditation is where you actually create feelings that you never had before. It's as if someone tells you, there's someone coming to town, a new person. The person's name is so-and-so. I want you to love that person. He says, love the person. I don't know who that person is. tell me about them. And they tell you about this person, and they keep on elaborating on it, every little detail about this person's sterling character, about their tremendous love for other people and their knowledge and everything positive about them. You begin to feel a sense of, I want to be close to that person. That's a unique individual. So even though a second before you heard of that person, there was zero feeling for that person. But once you meet the person or hear about them and you keep on thinking about it and dwelling on it, you can turn that into, with a scale of 1 to 10, you can turn it into anything up to 10. That is a very, very challenging way of creating your emotions. A less challenging way, the Alter Rebbe explains, is to recognize that we already have the love for God in us. While I may not have love for another entity out there, but that I could create that love, though it's pretty difficult. When it comes to God, the love of God is concealed within every single Jew. We have that hidden love, and our meditation merely has to ignite it, uncover it, actualize it. And the Alter Rebbe goes on to show that even a Jew who is so estranged from Judaism, when you ignite that spark that's within his or her soul, they will be prepared to die for God, even though they had never even thought of living a minute for God. But when it becomes so clear that this is going to sever their ties with God, they can't bear doing that. That's because their hidden love comes out. But that's in a time of crisis. We don't wait for crisis. We have to do it by our meditation. So if you apply your meditation, and that gives you the strength to overcome all the temptations of your evil impulse, your Yetzer Hara, your animal soul's egotistical obsession, then you could be a Beinoni, which means you could be a good Jew who acts the way God wants in thought, speech, and action, though you haven't changed a bit. Your personality has not changed. But the Alter Rebbe explains that when you act Jewishly, God in a godly manner, that enhances your soul more than the soul is on its own. Your soul, though it's a godly energy, when it comes into this world, the soul goes through an attenuating process. It becomes more acclimated to this physical world, so it can dwell together with an animal soul in a physical body. So the soul loses a lot of its radiance by the time it ends up in our bodies. Torah, mitzvahs, don't lose their radiance. It's God's wisdom and His will, and it makes no difference whether it's physical or spiritual, because God is not defined as spiritual. This is another subject, but I think it's important that in Judaism, God is not spiritual. He's as much capable, he is as capable of expressing himself through the physical as he is through the spiritual. And in fact, that's precisely what God does. God is more present in an act of a mitzvah than he is in all the meditations in the world and all the spiritual feelings in the world, because that's very nice. Spirituality is very important, and Chassidus certainly emphasizes spirituality, but it can't compare to the actions that we do that are godly. That's the thesis of the Alter Rebbe and Tanya. And once you master that, and you recognize the value of every mitzvah, and you are able to control your impulses because you have this love for God, then you can graduate. You're already finished, you think. And here the Alter Rebbe comes and says, there's a big caveat over here. There's a very, very big caveat. So that's where we're going to begin, in chapter 26.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Who am I? Because you're saying I have a godly soul and an animal soul.
Right.
I have these two souls, and who am I?
You-
I'm a third soul?
Yes, we have actually a third soul, an intellectual soul, that the Alter Rebbe doesn't talk about explicitly. He never uses the term the intellectual soul. But that's your consciousness, is your intellectual soul, that gets messages from the godly soul and from the animal soul.
So I'm my intellect who has
Well,
a godly soul.
you're a composite of all three, but what's what's functioning in neutral times, when you're not being enticed by the animal soul, and you're not being inspired by the godly soul, you're just governed by an intellectual identity.
So why would the Alter Rebbe not talk about that? He's talking about that you have.
He does talk about, he does mention it, he does allude to it at the end of chapter 2, according to the Tzemach Tzedek, but that's a different subject. That's going to take
The
us.
intellectual soul is neutral. It can kind of
It's
straddle both.
right.
Both the
In one hand,
godly
it's
and-
not godly. On the other hand, it's totally objective.
It's powerful.
So if it's objective, it's not going to be resistant to godly. If someone tells you, I'm going to give you a message, but it's not going to be good for your personal advancement, well, the animal soul doesn't want to hear it. But the intellectual souls, look, I am only interested in truth. If the truth takes me here, and it's not going to be comfortable for my animal soul, I don't care. It's truth. If the truth takes me there, I'll accept it wherever it takes me. That's the objective part of the human being. It's very hard to be objective because the animal soul imposes itself very strongly, and therefore you can't be objective in that direction. The tzaddik has his godly soul so dominant, so he can't be very objective in a good way. But anyhow, that's really a totally unrelated subject for the purposes of this chapter 26. We just have to know that we have these two souls that are in a constant struggle, and we have the means to win each battle if we follow the first 25 chapters of Tanya. And after that, we don't seemingly need to know any more. But the Alter Rebbe finds it very important to go on to the subject of simcha, which we'll leave untranslated most of the time. It can be translated as happiness, joy, whatever, many English words for it. But simcha is its own word, and we'll soon explain different meanings of what simcha really is. Because happiness and joy is only one aspect of simcha. But before we go into the actual text itself, I think there are certain things that we should talk about when we talk about importance of simcha. One of the fundamental teachings of Chassidus, starting with the Baal Shem Tov, was simcha, was joy. And you think that that's not a revolutionary thing. It says in the book of Psalms. We say it every day in our davening, every weekday. Ivdu es Hashem b'simcha. Serve God with joy, or with happiness. And there's so many other verses and statements in the Talmud and elsewhere that talk about simcha. But the degree to which Chassidus elevated simcha and the pedestal upon which it was placed was revolutionary, to the extent that when the Alter Rebbe was arrested, and the hope was that he would be eliminated by virtue of this arrest, the Moser, the informer, whose name was Avigdor, wrote a lengthy list of 19 accusations against the Alter Rebbe, and the Alter Rebbe had to respond to all those 19. And we have, from the archives, we have the actual handwriting of Avigdor and the actual accusations against the Alter Rebbe. And I just want to read the first one. This is how it's titled: The Chief Rabbi Avigdor, the son of Chaim, against Zalman ben Baruch. No rabbi, just Zalman the son of Baruch, the head of the Karliner sect in Belarus, or the Hasidim.
Really, they call him Karliner then.
Yeah, they called him Karliner because one of the leading Hasidic Rebbes, who was half a generation before the Alter Rebbe, was Reb Aaron of Karlin and Reb Shlomo of Karlin. So they were like seniors, so they called the Hasidim the Karliners for a while. But this is, I'm not going to go through all 19 because this is not what we're here for. But the first one is like this. In the book of the Karliner sect, or Hasidim, that was composed by the head of their teachers, Yisrael Balshenti, he calls him. Yisrael Balshenti, and Bear of Mizrich, no rabbi or anything. it is written in his book that a person has to always be besimcha, not just when he prays, but always. And that's contrary to the Jewish religion.
Oh my goodness.
Because this opinion or this approach expresses the idea that Mashiach already came.
So we should be depressed and lowly.
Right, so that is the first charge.
Wow.
19 charges. The first one, that means this was probably the one that really bothered him the most, was the emphasis that Chassidim put on joy. And the Alter Rebbe defends himself. This is the actual handwriting of this Avigdor. So the Alter Rebbe says it's not really accurate that it says in that book about Simcha, the son of Chaim, the Alter Rebbe doesn't call him by his name, didn't understand it at all. What it says there is only when a person is engaged in serving Hashem, he should pray with joy, as written in many of the holy writings, and is written in the Torah of Moshe. And he goes and begins the verses which we'll see later on. In Tanya, he quotes the same verse. And he says there are prayers, that special prayers, that when you say them, you're supposed to be in a state of sadness. No, it's like when you read the Shema before going to bed, or the midnight prayer. But anyhow, so the Alter Rebbe, explains that this was not said that a person has to be dancing and singing and dancing at funerals or things like that when the mood has to be more somber. But anyhow, that the fact that this was the first charge points to the centrality of Simcha in Judaism. Today, nobody will argue about the importance of Simcha, because the idea of singing and dancing, you go to any non-Hasidic or Hasidically challenged, as I like to put it, individuals, and they will do singing at weddings and at bar mitzvahs and on Shabbos and on other occasions. And
when they're not even allowed to, they'll be doing
well, they've changed that. Now, why is it that Simcha seemed to have not been so pronounced hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, since the destruction of the temple? And now it has become more accepted and more encouraged and pronounced. It's probably for the same two reasons that Chassidus was revealed in recent times that was not revealed previously. One reason is because we are very, very spiritually ill. We're living in a time that we are lacking so many spiritual abilities that our ancestors, that our forebears had. We are in a state of spiritual unconsciousness. It says the soul of the Baal Shem Tov was here to awaken us from our faint. And if we wouldn't have Chassidus, we would have lost our ability to survive, perhaps. And the same thing is true with Simcha. If we would not have the enhanced level of Simcha now, who knows if we could survive? Because you can only go downhill if you're always in a state of a morbid state, a sad state, depressed state. And the second reason why Hasidus was revealed now, because it is a preparation for the future. The teachings of Mashiach, you can't just go into them cold turkey without any preparation. So we're studying the things that will become much more amplified and studied in much greater depth in the days of Mashiach, but now we have to at least get a taste of it. And the same thing is true with joy. The Avigdor, the Musar, the informant, is right that it is associated with Mashiach. As it says, Oz Yimales Chok Pinu, then our mouths will be filled with laughter. And the word Mashiach, if you rearrange the letters, is Yismach, he shall rejoice. It has the same root letters, joy and Mashiach, same root letters. So he's right that is associated with Mashiach, but we are now preparing for that. So now joy has become a much more emphasized value. The flip side of joy, of course, is sadness. Rabbi Aaron of Karlin, whose name I just mentioned before, is always quoted as saying that if you look through the Torah, you will never find a place where it says you are forbidden to be sad. It says you can't steal, you can't kill, you can't do this, you can't eat pork. It doesn't say you can't be sad. But there is no sin in the Torah that a person would commit, that the person will not commit if they're depressed and they're sad. Because when you're sad and depressed, you don't have the defenses, as the Alter Rebbe will soon explain, to protect you against all the temptations and the challenges that we have. So though it's not a sin to be depressed, it could lead to all sorts of negative things. Rav Nachman of Breslov, although it could, I think the Baal Shem Tov, I think, said it also, is quoted as saying that the Yetzer Hara doesn't want you to sin when it gets you to sin. Let's say the Yetzer Hara tells you to, a person is trying to keep kosher, and then one day they just can't help themselves and they go into a non-kosher restaurant and they buy something not kosher. The Yetzer Hara doesn't want you to eat that non-kosher piece of food. Then why is it tempting you to eat it? It wants you to eat it,
bad.
and it wants you to feel depressed because you ate it, and then he says, now I got him. If you just do one sin and that would be it, I'm not going to waste my time. You choose your battles. Why would the Yetzer Hara want to get you to do one sin? It wants you to do everything wrong. So how does it get you? It has to get you depressed. But how could it get you depressed? An easy way is by getting you to sin. And then you're depressed, and then you go downhill. That's the very...
So eat the cheeseburger b'simcha.
That's not what he says. But the depression that comes after the sin is not the proper thing. On the other hand, joy is, or simcha, I can't use the term joy necessarily, but simcha in its true sense is the most powerful force. There's an expression in the discourses of the Rebbe Rashab, the previous Rebbe's father, and from there on it's been quoted hundreds of times. Simcha poretz geder. Simcha breaks through barriers, which is an original quote by the Rebbe Rashab, but it's actually a paraphrase of a Mishnah where it says, Melech poretz geder. A king can break through fences. If a king has to travel from point A to point B, and the closest route is to go through someone's yard, and to do that he has to knock down their fences, a king has that right, has that privilege. There's a discussion whether it only means in times of war, or it's just any time he wants, he has the power. But what does that mean? Why are we comparing joy to a king? Because what is it that a king has? A king has power.
Control.
He has power, and he also has confidence, because anyone less than a king doesn't know. I don't know if I can get away with this. Someone is above me. My employer is not going to like it. If my employer doesn't mind, the supervisor who's above him or her will mind. There's a whole hierarchy, so you're never confident in what you do. You don't have that power to operate freely in the total sense of the word. But if you're the king, you make up the rules. You're in total control, so you have total confidence. That's what simcha really is. Simcha means that you're connected to the ultimate king. You're connected to God. If a person is happy, but it's not a royal happiness, it's not connected to the source of power, which is God, then it's not really simcha. Then it's only a imitation of simcha. And if it's the imitation, will it work? And the answer is yes. God creates placebo effects in this world. That's why there's a book,
The Secret, the Law of Attraction.
The Secret.
There's no God there.
It talks about positive thinking and being optimistic and how it actually could change your life, which sounds very much like the Tzemach Tzedek's saying, tracht gut wird sein gut. Think positive and it will be positive. And the answer is no, it's not the same thing, because to think good means because you trust in God. That's the real thing. Thinking positive without God is the placebo. And God, for whatever reasons, created power that matches divine power. And it works, but it's not real. It's not based on reality. It's like a doctor who knows that he doesn't have a cure for an illness, And he says, look, it can't hurt. I'm going to tell the patient that this pill will cure them. There's a 30% chance that it will. The placebo effect. Should the doctor give it? Well, it's an ethical issue in the medical community. But if the doctor really wants to help that person, he should, because it's going to work. But the real happiness is what we call simcha, which is based on our connection to God. Why is it connected to God? Because number one, God has all this power. So when we connect ourselves to God, we have that power. But also, what is the definition of simcha? This is very important. How do you define it? You can translate it joy, happiness, but what is the definition? What really goes on with a person when they are in a state of simcha? A state of simcha means you are open. You are open. There's nothing blocking who you are and what you are. You are a person who's not in the state of simcha. It's like they're covered up. Their heart is plugged.
I was
There's
just
no
thinking about the word
flow.
plugged in. Like
Right.
simcha's like you're plugged right in, and the flow
Yeah,
is
but you
coming
have
right through.
you're open, so the flow. There's a flow constant through you, in you and through you. When you're not besimcha, that flow stops. Now, everyone could be in a state where they're open, and they could be in a state where they're closed. Every creature in this world, with one exception, God. God, from his point of view, can never be concealed. God can never be covered up. He's the ultimate open. To us, he may be concealed, because we're not able to see him. But God, from his own perspective, is never covered up. So that's where true simcha is, an entity that is always open. And when we're connected to that entity, then we can have that openness as well. And that gives us the empowerment to break through all our barriers. So that, in a nutshell, is what simcha is. And true simcha is connected to God. And I never saw this anyplace, but when we learn about simcha in Tanya, I noted not too long ago, and I never saw anyone mentioning this, that what is the first trait the Alter Rebbe speaks about in Tanya? The very first page, and the first third of the first page, or maybe the first quarter, a few lines down, he talks about simcha. He says if a person thinks of himself as not being a good person, that's not a good thing, because that could lead you to not serve God with joy. So it's interesting that the first thing the Alter Rebbe mentions is simcha, is joy. What's the last chapter in Tanya that the Alter Rebbe in his lifetime only published the first three parts of Tanya? The Likutei Amarim, as it's called, Shahar Yichud B'Amunah, and Igeres HaTshuva. What's the last chapter in Igeres HaTshuva? What is it about? Simcha. What is it? What we're learning now from chapter 26 on
Smack
to...
in the middle.
It's in the middle of the Tanya, of the first part of Tanya, and many other places where it talks about Simcha. But it's interesting that it's chapter 26, because anyone who knows a little bit about Jewish numerology knows that 26 is the gematria, the numerical value of God's name. Yud Kei Vav Kei adds up to 26. So what is that telling us? I think it's a hint that where does Simcha come from? It comes from an attachment to God's transcendence, where he is not cloaked or covered up. That's 26, as opposed to 86, which is Elokim, where God is covered up and he's not in an open state. But when God is in an open state and you're open to God, then that's the greatest source of true simcha, not just the placebo. Just one more word about the placebo. The placebo is not bad. We shouldn't dismiss it. There's a story in the Talmud, Tractate Tainus, that Eliyahu Navi, Elijah the prophet, was standing next to a rabbi, one of the great sages, and he pointed out a certain two individuals that they are members of the world to come, that they will have a share in the world to come. So the rabbi wanted to know, what kind of people are they? I mean, they must be great rabbis, great tzaddikim. He goes over to them, they were comedians. So he understood because they brought joy to people. But what does it have to do with having a share in the world to come? So but my thought is that where does sadness come from? It's by being in this world. This is a sad world. This world is a world of pain, of strife, of dishonesty, I mean, if you're focused on this world, you have to become depressed. You can't help it. That's what this world is. You want to be happy, you have to be able to transport yourself to another world. You know the famous story with the previous Rebbe when he was challenged by a communist official with a gun because he refused to cooperate. He says, "This little toy has made many people speak." And the previous Rebbe said, it can frighten someone who has one world and many gods. I have one God, but two worlds, so it won't frighten me. And the man put away his gun, so he's not getting anywhere. If you have two worlds and one God, you're happy. The gun doesn't even bother you. So now we will get into chapter 26 itself. The very first sentence is Aramaic. Brum, I'm going to read it in Hebrew or Aramaic and then translate it. Brum, but, Kigain da, Tzarech laodoi, klal gadol. This must be made known as a cardinal principle. The following is a cardinal principle, which is about joy.
Why suddenly Aramaic?
Why is he using Aramaic? Well, it's the rabbinic style to
But these words
intersperse
he uses
Hebrew
these
with
words.
Aramaic, because that's how the Talmud is written.
But he uses these words elsewhere in Hebrew.
So I have a theory about this, although you have to be very careful in proposing theories about Tanya. It says you're allowed to only if it can help you in serving Hashem. Yes.
When you say that you have to be careful with theories, because as you're speaking, I'm looking at rereading the introduction of the author of the Tanya of Alter Rebbe, trying to understand how he can give one set of guidance instructions that works for everybody. It's like a one-size-fits-all remedy, because we're all so different. And the Alter Rebbe clearly is stating that in order to really get guidance and help from the Tanya, you should learn it with a teacher. That's what I'm reading here. Because every person is so different, you have to go to your teacher to learn it, who could explain it. And what you're saying, that you have to be careful when you're giving explanations, it seems here that this is what the Alter Rebbe wants,
Obviously,
and how we should learn the Tanya, to go to a teacher.
No, we're talking about the concepts have to be explained. Otherwise,
But we're theorizing about...
No one could just learn these things on their own. But we're not talking just about explaining the concepts. It's about going into the choice of words, why the Alter Rebbe adds this word and changes that word, why he uses the Aramaic as opposed to the Hebrew.
I could see him using the same Hebrew words.
Right, he could have used the same Hebrew words. So this is my theory, and let's hope that we could learn something from it as well. Number one, the Aramaic, the Jerusalem Talmud says, is a language that is best suited for sad events. If you want to recite dirges, lamentations, and express pain and anguish, you do it in Aramaic, which is a theory that a contemporary rabbi, he's not alive anymore, says why the Kaddish is in Aramaic.
Is it a whiny kind of sounding language?
It helps a person express pain. It's good for that expression. And it is considered to be the language of exile. Because when the Jews left...
That's right.
Almost like Yiddish is a
Exactly.
sarcastic language. There's a lot of sarcasm.
Right, Yiddish expresses a lot of pain.
Right.
It's
so
true.
it makes
You
sense.
can't
But also,
kvetch.
if it's the language of
You
exile...
can't kvetch in Hebrew the way you could kvetch in Yiddish.
Right. The oivim.
But if it's the language of the exile, so exile is a sad place to be.
That's exactly the point. Targum, the Rebbe would always explain that anything that's translated into Aramaic means that it's designed to relate to people who are in a state of exile. That's why the opening paragraph of the Haggadah, Hey Lach Ma'anya, is Aramaic. The simple reason is it was written at a time when people spoke Aramaic. It's like us writing it in English. But the deeper meaning is it's there to relate to us in our state of exile. And the Alter Rebbe perhaps is recognizing that his audience is living in a very dark period.
It's a transition.
People in the Alter Rebbe's times were, especially the Alter Rebbe's Chassidim, were very poor. And they were going through all
Pogroms
sorts of,
continues.
I don't know if there were that many pogroms in his time, but life was very difficult for the Chassidim materially. And Chassidim were being attacked not just by the anti-Semites, but by their fellow Jews from two directions, from the Misnagdim, the real opponents, the Avigdors of the world, who really wanted them dead, and from the Maskilim, the Enlightenment people, the forerunners of Reform Judaism. They were out to destroy all vestiges of religiosity, of Judaism, and the Hasidim were their main target because they felt they were going to make sure that Judaism is perpetuated. So the Alter Rebbe and the Hasidim were living in times when there was a lot of, the Golus was very, very strongly felt, and that's the type of people the Alter Rebbe is addressing to get them out of this Golus mentality. That might be
So it's a
reason
little transitional.
why he starts it off in Aramaic.
Transitional phrase.
But then the word brum, I did a little research. Brum is a biblical word. It's used in 5 places in Tanakh. In an Aramaic parts of Tanakh. Part of Tanakh is written in Aramaic. The book of Daniel is mostly Aramaic. The book of Ezra and Nehemiah are also Aramaic. Have a lot of Aramaic in them. And the word brum is used there. And brum means but, however. But in Hebrew, in biblical Hebrew, there are a lot of other words. Ach,
Aval.
ulam, avol,
Ulai.
omnam. Ulai is perhaps. But there are at least 4 other biblical words for but. So why would the Alter Rebbe choose he's using Aramaic, but still, it's not. That's why I asked my son before we started the class if he knows other places the Alter Rebbe uses this word, and if he does, it's not a common word. But I looked at the context in which the word is used. It's used in the context of how the temple was being rebuilt by Cyrus, and the book of Ezra is saying that the temple was destroyed by the Babylonians. Brum, however, King Cyrus gave permission to rebuild the
rebuild it.
temple. That means when you say but, sometimes but could be, it's a caveat, but it's a mild caveat. You know, it doesn't change the whole subject. But sometimes when you want to say but, you're saying this is a real heavy caveat. This is a real important thing. What do I mean by that? At this point, by chapter 26, we should already know how to be a good Jew. We don't have to worry. We know exactly what the recipe is. If we choose to follow it, we're safe and secure. So what's the point of going on now? So the Alter Rebbe is saying, no, it's a big mistake. If you don't conquer
This
the problem of simcha, the challenge of simcha, I should say, not the problem of simcha, then everything could fall to the wayside. Your whole life's effort will come to naught. Brum, however, this is a very important, not just a mild little, additional
idea.
thing, in addition to all the things he said before, it's good to have this in mind as well. No, it's not just having in mind, because as he goes on now to explain, it is with the service of God, just as it is with a victory over a physical opponent. Kikamo in Hebrew, kikamo shenitzachem l'natzer davar gashmi. Just as it is to have victory in a physical sense. Kigain, for instance, Shnei Anashim Hamisabkim Zeh Im Zeh. 2 people, although the people who are always harping on why they always use the masculine, no one's complaining about it over here.
Yeah, they're fighting.
The word anashim really could mean men. 2 men are wrestling with each other. No one's going to say, why don't you include the women here? Well, it is generic. It doesn't mean men. It means people. But it's a masculine word. 2 people are wrestling with one another. Lahapil zeh. And what's their objective? To fell the other, to knock down the other. Hine, Now, im ha'echad hu bi'atzlus ukvedus, if one of them is lazy, actually the translation is not he is lazy,
Depressed or
he is
heavy.
in a state of laziness. Ukvedus, and he is also sluggish. Kvedus comes from the word kaved, which is heavy. He's heavy in a emotional sense. Yenutzach bikal v'yipal, he will be prevailed over, he will be defeated handily, easily, and he will fall. Gam imhu gibar yaisa mechaverei, even if he is stronger than his fellow. So you have two people wrestling. The stronger one is not necessarily the winner, because if the stronger one had a bad day before he goes into the ring, even though he's the favor, the odds are 10 to 1 that he's going to win, but he had a bad day and he's depressed, he might lose. He could very easily lose. That's the analogy. This is the sports analogy that the Alter Rebbe uses. Everyone notes that this is a sports analogy, but it's a very careful analogy. The Alter Rebbe already gave an analogy earlier in Tanya of two kings fighting for control over turf, over a city, over a country. When two kings fight, they don't wrestle with each other. They have armies, and the armies are shooting arrows. Nowadays, missiles, drones. They're not wrestling. So why does he change the analogy from kings fighting to two people wrestling? So the commentaries on Tanya explain that when you wrestle, there are two things there. Number one, you're embracing each other. From the outside onlooker, it could look like, oh, these two people are hugging each other. They're in love with each other. That's number one. Number two, their objective is not to kill the other one. Their objective is to knock him down, so you could win the prize. When two kings are fighting, they're fighting to the death, and they're not in close contact with one another. So why does the Alter Rebbe change the whole approach here? Because we're talking about a Beinoni. The Beinoni is someone who doesn't really intend to destroy his Yetzer Hara, his evil impulse. Yes.
So is this related to fighting the angel with the evil?
Yes. That's the biblical model of this, where Jacob is wrestling with the angel. That's a metaphor. It was an actual thing that happened, but it's also a metaphor for the future, that our struggle sometimes can be won to the death. It can be won a wrestling match. Although some will argue that the angel wanted to kill him, but he just struck him in his leg, and he gave him sciatica. But it's a very good observation that's the earliest model of it. Two people wrestling. So number one, in a wrestling match, you're embracing. Number two, the object is not to kill the other, because the Beinoni is not interested in, because it's not realistic to try to destroy the evil impulse. That's not realistic for most people. There are tzaddikim who are like that. They don't have the struggle anymore. The Beinoni is trying to just see to it that the other side doesn't prevent you from living in a godly manner. That's all it wants. So you're wrestling to knock him down so you could get up there and daven. You can get up there and keep Shabbos, whatever the mitzvah may be. Number two, it's also deceptive. It's deceptive. The Yetzer Hara is hugging you. The Yetzer Hara could come to you and say, you know what, I really want you to become a better person. I want you to do tshuva. So I'm going to show you how many sins you really did and how bad you really are. This is for your good. I love you. The Yetzer Hara sometimes hugs us and embraces us, but his intention is to knock us down, just like I mentioned before for Rav Nachman of Breslov. He wants you to feel terrible about your sins, because that's how he is able to win the battle and the war, because he gets you so depressed because of your negativity that you can't get up again. So that's why it looks like he's hugging you, because that's his deception. The Yetzer Hara is, by definition, a deceiving force. As I once heard from, I think it was Rabbi Heschel Greenberg, that the Yetzer Hara comes to you and says, look, I don't want you to become less religious. I want you to do one little sin. You allowed to indulge yourself a little bit. And I promise you, tomorrow I won't ever bother you again. Maybe every 2 years I'll get you to do a little sin. But just do it now, because if you don't do it now, you're going to be constantly just thinking about it, and in the end you'll do it anyhow. So do it now and let's get it over with, and tomorrow you can have a free conscience. And you say, that makes sense, it's very logical. Tomorrow, the Yetzer Hara comes and tries to get you to do another sin. Says, one second, you promised me that if I do this sin yesterday, you won't come again. He says, what are you going to call me, Yetzer Hara? That's my job. That's exactly what the Yetzer Hara is all about. Deception is what Yetzer Hara is. Truth is what God is truth. Torah is truth. And as I said before, the only way you can have true simcha is by connecting yourself to something that is true. Any other simcha is, at best, a placebo. And sometimes placebos are necessary.
Based on what you just said now, that the only way you could really attain simcha is through truth, right? That's
true simcha. The word simcha, as opposed to English words joy, happiness, you can get so many different ways. But true simcha, you have to have it connected to a source of truth, of true simcha, which is godly.
In English, fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
Doesn't really work with simcha, because
it does.
You can't attain true simcha through fake.
That's why I'm going to say that it's not totally true, fake it till you make it, and it's not totally wrong, because it's a stopgap measure. You can't allow yourself to have a lull in your life when you're really down, because that could destroy you. So while you're waiting to get the true simcha, fake it, and it's not faking. It means that it's not 100%.
You sincerely want it. It's just not fully available.
No, you feel good. I'm not saying that a good feeling is not real, but it's not real simcha. It's not the ultimate thing, but it's a stopgap measure that it prevents you from falling down, keeps you afloat. It's like, someone falls out of a boat and he has a life jacket on. It's not really what is going to keep you going forever, because you can't stay in the water for too long.
It's like the treading of the water.
It's treading water, keeping you afloat. It's keeping you afloat. And also, there's another thing that later on the Alter Rebbe is going to say, that if a person is depressed, what a person should do is take advantage of that depression and apply it. You're depressed because you lost your job. Apply it to depression because of your sins. You're supposed to sometimes, as we'll soon see, designate times to be sad for your sins as part of tshuva. Divert it there. So once you have happiness of the placebo, it's easier to divert it into the real thing. If someone is happy, what are they going to do? Go to a farbrengen. If you're in a good mood and you want to celebrate, instead of going to the bar, go to the farbrengen. The word farbrengen also has the letters for bar in it. It's not a bar. It's the real simcha.
It also has barf in it too, Rabbi.
Yes. Okay.
That sometimes happens too. Too much for a pregnant.
So that's the story with the wrestling. That wrestling is there to teach you don't have to kill the Yetzer Hara, the animal soul. You have to just put him down, and that is good enough. But in order to do that, you have to be besimcha. And otherwise, if you forget about that, then forget about the first 25 chapters of Tanya. It won't work. It won't work. The Rambam gives in his Mishnah Torah several chapters how to lead a healthy life. He says, I guarantee you, if you follow this, you will be healthy, you will never get sick. Rambam guarantees it. However, he says, if you don't follow it to the T, if you leave something out and you cheat, then all the guarantees are off. That's what the Alter Rebbe is saying. I'm guaranteeing, the Alter Rebbe says, this is the way to reach the goal, but if you don't have simcha, the guarantees are off. Kacha mamish. We just finished the analogy, the metaphor. Now he applies it.
In the metaphor that we just read, we didn't even say the word sad yet. We just said,
the word
lazy and sluggish.
Lazy,
Right.
Meaning that laziness really is even worse than sadness.
Well,
where
the
does
lack
laziness?
of energy. The lack of energy.
What is it that causes you to lose? It's not the depression itself. It's the inertness. It's the lack of energy that makes you weak. In the analogy, what does your depression have to do with winning a battle? It's a physical battle. So why would you feeling depressed make you lose the physical battle? The answer is the depression leads to sluggishness. You lose your energy.
But still, this is still just an analogy.
It is an analogy, but it has to be accurate in the analogy. So in the analogy, the depression is not the factor that causes you to lose. It's the lack of energy, which is caused by the depression. It doesn't make a difference whether it's because of depression or you're just lazy. Some people can be lazy without depression.
Right. And it seems almost that the nature of laziness can cause more destruction than sadness and depression.
Well,
because at least the person that's sad is sensitive to someone else's sadness, and
it depends on the
person
nature
who's
of the
lazy,
sadness.
what positivity comes out of laziness? Is there a positivity that can come out of laziness?
No, I can't see any.
Right.
There are two forms of sadness, as the Alter Rebbe will explain, one bad and one good. But I don't know if there are two forms of laziness, unless it's laziness to do an Avera. When it comes to a sin, he says, I'd love to do it, I'm too lazy to get out of bed to go out and commit that sin. I'm just too lazy to do it. No, you could have that. But if they're not lazy to do a mitzvah, but they're lazy to do a sin, that's a good laziness. Now, kacha mamish, so it is, similarly, but the word mamish, the Alter Rebbe loves to throw that word in whenever he makes a point. Don't take my analogy as a cute example, but it's not an accurate one. It's really an accurate one. B'nitzachan hayetzer, with the victory or the conquest of one's evil nature. Iyefsher lenatzcho, you cannot conquer. It's impossible to conquer, to be victorious. Bi'atzlus, with laziness, ukvedus, and heaviness or sluggishness. Hanimshachos mi'atzvus, that stem from atzvus, which they translate as sadness, depression, melancholy. V'timtum halev, and with the heart becomes like a stone, it's dulled, ke'evin, like a rock. So the Alter Rebbe is making a point that laziness, spiritually speaking, comes from depression, from sadness. So that already gives you a test to know if your sadness is positive, has any positive value to it or not. If it leads to inaction, to laziness, you know it's negative. If it doesn't lead to, then it might have some value, which he's going to say in a moment.
Well, you were saying how Hashem is open revelation and clarity, and the stone, this idea of
It's closed.
the timtum is totally
plugged.
closed and
It's occluded. Kiyam bezrizus. The only way you could win is with zrizus. They translate that as alacrity. It says Abraham taught us the virtue of alacrity. Vayashkem Avram baboker. Abraham woke up early in the morning to go to the Akedah, to kill his son. And the Alter Rebbe later on, Tanya asked the question, why is Abraham credited with sacrificing his son as the greatest merit? There were so many other Jews who lived after Abraham, who were not as great as Abraham, who didn't speak directly to God, who unfortunately, tragically, gave their lives and the lives of their families not to betray their belief in one God. So why is Abraham given so much credit? And one of the answers the Alter Rebbe gives is that Abraham did it with zrizus. He did it with such alacrity, no hesitation, no procrastination.
Well, it was also totally against his nature.
Right, but that's a separate part of it. But the zrizus, hanim shachas, which comes from his simcha, upsichas halev, from simcha, and an open heart, or as they put it here in the commentary, in the small print, the responsive heart, v'taharaso, that is unblemished, bikol nidnu daga ve'etze ba'olam, by any trace of worry and sadness in the world. In other words, if you want to win the battles, all the tools that we have at our disposal will only work if we are in a state of simcha. So that's why simcha is not a luxury. It's not a right. In America, we have the right for the pursuit of happiness. Although I just heard someone quote, I think it was Shais Taub, who quoted someone who said that you cannot get happiness through the pursuit of happiness. Happiness has to ensue, not you don't pursue it. I'm not sure that that's true, but it's certainly true that it's not a right to be happy. It's an obligation to be happy because it's the only way you could really survive spiritually in this world of so much impurity. But now the Alter Rebbe asks a question. Umasha Kosov, but what does it mean when it's written in Ecclesiastes, B'chol, in Mishlei, in Proverbs, B'chol etzev yiyah mosar, in every sadness there will be profit. Rashi and other commentaries translate the word etzev here not as sadness, but as hard work. Some people will complain, what's the point in working hard? I could make a living by working less time, less effort. No, every time you put your effort into something, there is a profit that comes out of it. But the Alter Rebbe takes the word more literally than the other commentators, that it means sadness. In every sadness, there is a profit. There will be profit. How could that be? We just said sadness is such a negative thing. Why does King Solomon, the wisest of all people, call it a profitable venture? So the Alter Rebbe says, on the contrary, as we'll soon see, Perusha, what it means, Sheyia eze yisron umayla mizeh. It means that some profit and some advantage would be derived from it. So what does that tell you? If I tell you that if you do A, it'll lead to B, it's saying that A is not B. A could lead to B, but A is not B. Hine adarabba, the wording, there will be profit, implies that on the contrary, Melashon zem mashma, from this wording it implies sha'etzev mitzad atzma ein b'mayla, that sadness itself has no virtue. Rak sheyagia v'yova mimenu eze yisro, except that some profit will ultimately be derived from it. That means sadness in and of itself is not positive. There is a type of sadness that can be positive in terms of what it will yield. V'hainu, and that means hasimcha ha'amitis b'Hashem elikov haba achar ha'etzev ha'amiti. The true joy in God, which follows the true sadness, or the justified sadness, over one's sins, li'itim mizimanim alavanosav b'mar nafsho v'lev nishbar, with bitterness of soul and a broken heart, which must come at specific, suitable times. What does he mean by this? What he's saying over here is that, yes, there is a concept that because we have sins, we have to break ourselves in order to break the negative energy in us. And that requires sadness. But when is that sadness proper? Only, and when is it called justified? Only when it leads to joy. So it's an easy test. If a person is sad, because we're talking now because of their sins. What about a person is sad because of material reasons? That we'll talk about later. But if a person is sad because they know they're not the way they really think they should be, they know they've done things that are wrong, and they feel sad about it. Well, the test if that sadness is kosher or not is after they finish feeling sad, do they then feel this joy, this tremendous rush of joy and simcha? If that's how they feel, then they know that that sadness was positive. But if after their sadness, because they're hitting themselves for all their sins, and after they finish hitting themselves, they fall asleep, they miss eating their supper, they don't they can't make their appointments, or they just feel lazy, then you know that that sadness was evil, was negative, was totally negative, and was completely the work of the Yetzer Hara. It's part of the process of knocking you down, and your adversary is winning the battle because of that sadness, even though ostensibly I'm sad because I don't want to go against God. No, you're sad because your ego makes you feel I'm such a
Low life.
I think of myself as being so great, and yet, you know what? I'm not able to back it up with my behavior, so I feel my ego was hurt. Well, if your ego is hurt, you're not going to get more energy. You're going to feel depressed, and then you're going to do things without any energy and just go to sleep.
And that's why you need specific times to go
Right.
over that instead of letting it bleed into the rest of your day.
Right. That's why you need specific times. Shays Taub, I listened to his tape before. He says, you have to make an appointment with your Yetzer Hara. He says, Yetzer Hara, I know you want to tell me that I did this sin and that sin. Tonight at 10:15, after my day is over, let's make a 10-minute appointment. And then he says, 90% of the time, he doesn't show up for the appointment. If he really cared about you and really wanted you to do tshuva, why doesn't he show up for the appointment? The answer is he doesn't want you to be in control, because designating the time means you're in control of the Yetzer Hara and of the process of sadness, the necessary sadness. You're in control of it. But if the other way is it controls you, and that means that your ego is really motivating you, and your ego takes over. So what we see over here is that there is a type of sadness that is permissible. The type of sadness the Alter Rebbe refers to here with a different word. Generically, the word atzvus can include all forms of sadness, the kosher, the non-kosher. But if you want to specifically refer to the kosher kind, he calls it merirus. Merirus translates literally as bitterness. But I think bitterness, the English word bitterness, has the wrong connotations as well. When a person takes some horseradish and the seder and swallows it, what's your reaction? Your reaction is it really, you start coughing. It energizes you. It's not you fall asleep. You're awake and you're groping. You're trying to breathe and you're coughing and
There's a lot of energy. The face.
A lot
gets
of
red.
energy.
Banging my head.
Right, your face turns red and you're doing everything to try to deal with it. That's a healthy sign. It's a healthy sign because inactivity is a form of death. That's unhealthy. Activity is a sign of life. That's healthy. In order for merirus, for sadness to be healthy, to have a kosher sign to it, it has to be active. And merirus is active. I feel very bitter about my sins. I feel bitter. I'm not sad, but bitter.
Is there a better word?
Not
in
see
English?
the reason why I don't like the word bitter is because there are some people who keep a grudge for many years and they're always bitter about someone. That's not positive at all.
Listen
That's
up.
negative. But here it's bitter more in the physical sense of bitterness. Take it literally, but you feel like you're eating. When you think about your sins, you're just eating a lot of horseradish. Just think of it that way.
Right.
Because Miriam says Mara. And it's also the name Miriam. You can see she
Right.
was a very active person.
Right, Miriam was not a negative person, God forbid. She was not a depressed person, but she was very much moved by the suffering of the Jewish people to the point where she took action. She was the most active, proactive person in the whole story of the Exodus. What does she do? She runs to the sea to see where the baby was put. She was running in to help. If the baby's going to make it, he'll make it. If he doesn't make it, God forbid, he won't make it. She wasn't saving the baby, but she had to be active, and she runs to call the mother. She's running to the Pharaoh, to the midwife. She's constantly energized, but yet she's called Miriam, bitter, because that's not bitter in the emotional sense. It's a bitterness. It's a physical type of bitterness. I think that's important to point out. Because everyone always translated as bitterness, and I always felt
What would be a good English word for it?
disturbed. You're disturbed, but that could also have
Yeah,
the wrong
very
connotations.
negative connotation.
Right.
I can
It's
tell you.
you're agitated.
I'm thinking like agitated, but that
Agitated.
could also have a negative connotation.
Upset.
Yeah, you're upset about your sins, but upset could all it's not. I think the physical idea of eating something bitter is
Pained.
you're pained by it. Yeah, okay.
Pained.
But again, the test over here is actually I
The
think
result of what
there are
comes before.
five tests as to whether what you're experiencing is depression, or sadness on one hand, or it's the kosher kind on the other hand.
The English word emotion, is there any depth to the fact that emotion has a lot of motion?
Yes,
Yeah, sure,
exactly. That's
sure.
exactly what the word means.
Number one,
Energy.
one condition is that you have to designate a time for it. If it comes into your mind not in the time that you made the appointment, then it's not kosher. Number two, it has to be short-lived. If it keeps on going on, let's say you make an appointment at 10 o'clock at night, but you don't put an end to it, you keep on going all night long, then it can be, although they were Chassidim, they used to read the Kriya Shema all night long. Mr. Merowitz told me he was a roommate of Rabbi Metzger.
Really?
Rabbi Metzger would read Kriya Shema at night, all night long.
Right.
But those are exceptional people, but they were happy
We're
people
very
the next
slow
day.
readers.
Right. So the first thing is it has to be designated time, so you're in control. It has to be short duration. It has to be followed by joy. You're full of life and vitality. It doesn't make you lazy. It makes you active. And it's not about your ego. It's not about you. It's about, look, I did something that Hashem doesn't like. That's not right.
Is that
Hashem
in
is
the lessons in Tanya?
what?
Is that where the 5 are?
No, I just jotted it down here, my margin.
I was just speaking of
Let's finish off this thought. Sha'yedei zeh, through this, nishbara ruach hatuma, v'sitra achra, you break the spirit of impurity and of the sitra achra. Sitra achra is the Kabbalistic term for evil, which simply means the other side of holiness.
like them.
What? The other side of holiness.
Could it be also that he calls it the other side because evil equals to like disunity, and like when things are not unified exactly?
But why is it called
Other
the...
side, like there's
The other
two
side. In
sides
other
here.
words, a team. The other side.
Yeah.
Because we know that holiness is all unified
Okay.
and all connected. What?
It could be.
It's just the fact that it's a division.
Right.
And-
Other side sounds like division.
So it breaks the spirit of impurity of the Sitra Achra, umechitza shel barzel, and the iron curtain, hamafsekes beino la'avisha b'shamayim, that separates between his father, himself, and his Father in heaven. This term, iron curtain, they call it iron wall. Chitza could be a curtain or partition,
Divider.
a wall, a divider. The source of that expression is actually in the book of Yecheskel. God tells him to take an iron pan and put it in front of the city to suggest there will be an iron wall separating the Jerusalem from the Jewish people. That's the term. That's an iron wall. Mechitza, the term mechitza, which is partition or curtain, that's in the Gemara Sota. The Gemara says that even a mechitza shel barzel, a curtain made out of iron, does not separate between God and a Jewish person. What separates is our sins, not iron curtains. So the term iron curtain is actually a biblical and Talmudic term, and it became incorporated in in contemporary political writings. So that's how we break that wall. We break that wall through this sadness. Even though sadness is not a good thing in and of itself, but sometimes you need to use tough love. You have to use a destructive force to destroy evil. Sometimes you want to catch a crook who's very cunning and deceiving. You have to deceive the crook into thinking that he's going to be. That's why the FBI has a sting operation. What it really is taking a deceptive criminal and using deception to catch him. Well, sometimes in order to break the iron wall, you have to use a forceful instrument, which is what even the kosher sadness is. Kosher sadness, if it persists too long, it becomes destructive. It can only be used as an instrument to break down that wall. Kamishakasa bezohar, as it says in the Zohar, al pasuk, in the verse in Psalm 51. Who composed that psalm? King David. When did he say it? When he was confronted by the Navi, Nathan, about his affair with Bathsheba, and King David was doing tshuva. So he says over there, Ruach nishbara, a broken spirit, Lev nishbar, a broken heart, you will not despise. So the Zohar says like this: a broken spirit of the it's redundant. A broken spirit, broken heart. What's the repetition? So the Zohar says, what breaks the spirit of evil? By a broken heart. So that's why once you break the spirit of evil, then there's a reason to rejoice. That gives you the reason to rejoice. That's how the kosher sadness works. Why does it lead to joy? How can you guarantee I'll be sad for 15 minutes and I'll be happy? Because you know that you effectively got rid of that iron wall. That's why you're happy. The reason for sadness is because of that iron wall. Now you got rid of it, you don't have to worry. Then the preceding verses will be fulfilled for him. What does it say before that? Tashmiyeni sasin v'simcha v'gomer. Hashivuli sason yishecha v'ruch nadiva v'gomer. Make me hear joy and gladness. Restore to me the joy of your salvation, and support me with your generous spirit. So what we see over here is that the broken heart is a prelude to a rejoicing heart. Just the story that Rabbi Wolfson, Moshe Wolfson, is one of the, if there's anyone today that's, you can say is a really righteous Jew, recognized by everyone, he's one of the leaders of the Yeshiva Torah Vodas. But he was very close to the Rebbe, even though he wasn't a card-carrying Chabad Chassid. He wrote a few volumes of commentary on the Tanya, actually. But he came. So he tells the story. I printed the story in Hebrew. He had a family member that was very sick, and he was in Yerushalayim during that time. So every night he would go to the churva of the Ruzhana Shul in Yerushalayim. You familiar with that shul? It's in the old city. It's like an old Hasidic synagogue. the Ruzhiner dynasty, and he would go there. It's like a deserted place, so we'd have privacy there, and he would go there every night to read the Shema. And one night, when he came to we say Psalm 51 in the nighttime Shema, he came to this verse: a broken heart, a crushed heart, God does not despise. He broke out crying, and he repeated the verse 20 times, and nobody knew. He did it, and no one was there. So then he tells the story that later on, when he came to America, and he went to get $1 from the Rebbe, he asked for a bracha for that family member, and the Rebbe told him the merit of saying the words "Leiv Nishbar V'Nitka," a broken heart, with such kavana, will certainly stand for him, protect your family member. So he told a story in Miami, in the yeshiva in Miami. He said nobody knew about it. He didn't tell anybody about this. Well, he said it with such kavana that he would certainly. So the broken heart is not a negative thing. There's a famous saying of the Kotzker Rebbe.
Nothing more complete.
There's nothing more. He said there's nothing more straight than a crooked ladder. There's nothing more black than white shrouds. There's nothing more crooked than a gleichwertel. Literally, gleichwertel means a straight word, like a straight lie. Nothing more crooked than a straight lie, and there's nothing more whole than a broken heart. So what does that mean? A broken heart is a good thing? We never look at it as a positive thing. What he's referring to is this very, very confined, broken heart at a special designated time that is of short duration, that is filled with energy to break down that wall, followed by great joy.
I always think of there's nothing more whole than a broken heart, as like when tragedy strikes the Jewish people, like this summer with what happened this past summer in Israel.
Everyone
And
comes
everyone's
together.
complete, right.
Right,
Like,
so the heart of the Jewish people becomes unified.
Right.
Yeah, that's another way of looking at it. Let's just try to. Anyone want to stay? It's already almost 10 o'clock, so we'll stop
We have
over
for
here.
breakfast last.
Let's stop over here, and we'll continue Mr. Shem next week.
Thank you.
I missed the first couple minutes. Why did we start with Simcha with Chava?
You missed it. He did the first 25 chapters.
I gave a
I just
summary
came too late.
of the first 25 chapters. The reason why I started over here is because a lot of people started the Tanya and they always learn the first few
And
chapters.
they never get past that.
So I decided that let's start from 26, and when we finish the Tanya, we'll go back to the beginning and review it, God willing.
Now, when do we get to hear this? On the
Oh,
on
you
your
get to turn
website?
that
it will
off.
be?
Well, we have
Oh,
to,
wait.
Push a button.
how do you shut this off?